and welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Carrie Oderman with UATV. The humanitarian situation in Ukraine continues to be jeopardized by the ongoing war in Donbas. People living in isolated villages and near the contact line are especially affected due to the lack of access to quality services. In a situation where 1.3 million people need access to health care in the East, much more needs to be done. Joining us in the studio today to expand on this topic is Vitaliy Nabukhotny, lawyer of the NGO Regional Center for Human Rights. Hello, and thank you for being with us.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Let's begin with an understanding of what human rights are. There's a wide definition, and I think perhaps for the Ukraine, the most relevant to our discussion is the right to life and liberty, freedom from torture, freedom of opinion, and freedom of expression. Civilians living in a war zone often have limited access to these rights. What are the main rights that your organization is concerned with?
Yeah, thank you for your question. You know that human rights protection is an extremely important topic during every armed conflict worldwide. And if we are talking about a list of human rights our organization protects, first of all, I'd like to emphasize protection of freedom of movement, especially during Crimean occupation. As well, I'd like to stress property rights protection. There are a lot of violations of property rights in occupied Crimea nowadays. As well, I'd like to stress protection of personal life. And protection of rights such as deprivation of liberty and personal security.
Let's talk about some of these things that you've underscored. Are there any key examples dealing with people that would be familiar to our visitors that you can expand on?
Yeah, one of the example I can stress, for example, a lot of prisoners from occupied Crimea transferred from occupied Crimea to the territory of Russian Federation, and in that case we can say about freedom of movement, about expulsion of Ukrainian citizens who were kept in custodial settings from occupied Crimea to the territory of Russian Federation, and I think that we can qualify such acts such as deportation, and it also violates the freedom of movement according to Protocol 2, according to Article 2, Protocol 4 of European Convention.
Now, you're obviously an expert on this, and some of the terms you used might be a little bit hard for our viewers to digest. What you're basically saying is people that were incarcerated in Crimea have then been moved to Russia.
Absolutely right, and you know that's why we can qualify such acts as deportation, because in that case a person transfer de jure borders of Ukraine and from Ukraine to the territory of Russia, and we know that Crimea is a sovereign territory of Ukraine, and that's why we call these acts as, for example, deportation.
Now, in international law, there are a lot of things that are based on definition. When there's a conflict, civilians are obviously always treated different than military personnel. How does defining who is military and who's not military make your work more difficult?
Yeah, that's true. You know that civilians, they enjoy a big list of rights according to Fourth Geneva Convention. All this convention is about rights and freedom of civilians that occurs under occupation or during armed conflicts, and of course we have to say that status of civilian person is much different from the status of military personnel, because you know during the armed conflicts the combatant of one state can kill the combatant of in other states, and from the other side, of course, combatants can't kill the civilian person, because civilian persons enjoy the special legal status according to the Fourth Geneva Convention.
Let's talk a little bit about how to protect civilians once their human rights are infringed upon. What are the international organizations that take care of this?
Yeah, actually there are a lot of international judicial and quasi-judicial bodies. The most popular in Ukraine is European Court of Human Rights, as we already mentioned. Also very popular in Ukraine is United Nations human rights bodies. There are a lot of human rights bodies. The most popular is United Nations Human Rights Committee. As well, we can talk about International Court of Human Rights. Oh, sorry, not International Court of Human Rights, International Criminal Courts that function under Rome Statute of these courts. And of course it's very important for Ukrainian nationals to seek justice within international mechanisms, because only if we file cases in such international judicial bodies, we can try to end impunity for grave crimes and for human rights violation committed in the territory of Ukraine.
International law doesn't necessarily seem like a quick fix. If someone is going to the International Criminal Court, for example, these cases can take a very, very long time.
Absolutely.
They set precedents, though, that may help in future conflicts. Do you have any examples of things that are being taken to the International Criminal Court or the European Court of Justice from examples in Ukraine that might help other people in a future conflict?
It's a tricky question, because if we're talking about Crimea, it's the first precedent in the history after the Second World War. And for example, within Crimea situation, we have the acts that we can qualify, I think, that as a war crimes. For example, I say about forced conscription of Crimean population to the armed forces of Russian Federation. It's the first precedent in history after Second World War, because we know that we have a case during Second World War when Gauleiter of Third Reich, Robert Wagner, was accused by the tribunal after Second World War on the count of war crimes, because he also conscripted the French population in Alsace to the military forces of Third Reich, and this act was one of the counts of indictments against him.
Okay, when the Nuremberg trials are history, it seems difficult to be able to get evidence while a conflict is going on. How is evidence being collected to support the claims?
Yeah, sometimes it's very difficult, it's very complicated, but within our work we try to cooperate with civilians who live in occupied territory. We try to cooperate with the victims' relatives and friends. We try to cooperate with our lawyers, our partners who stay in occupied Crimea and who still protect human rights there. For example, the rights of Crimean Tatar people. We know a lot of cases about Crimean Tatar lawyers who still stay in Crimea, and they try to seek justice within occupying courts. And of course we try to use all the evidence we can get from them, from civilians who stay there, in order to draft and collect all the evidence in order to submit all this material to the international judicial courts.
Seems like a challenging and dangerous job. Now, you were talking about your organization and what you do. Could you tell us a little bit about the NGO?
About my NGO?
Yes.
Yeah. My NGO was established in 2013 in Sevastopol. I'm not from Crimea, but my partners, my lawyers with whom I work, they are mostly from Sevastopol, from Crimea, and with the beginning of occupation they transferred from Sevastopol to Kiev in order to continue the human rights activity. And basically we are focusing on Crimean issues. Most of our work concerns the filing of applications to European Court of Human Rights, as well as communication to the International Criminal Court, as well as cooperation within United Nations human rights bodies such as United Nations Human Rights Committee.
Well, it's obviously a topic that unfortunately is very important right now in Ukraine. It's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Vitaliy Nabukhotny, lawyer for the NGO Regional Center for Human Rights. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more with UATV.